Hi, welcome aboard, people, and my new show here. This is The Strange Reality with Dave Emmons, and my guest is going to have some strange things for all of us. I've talked to him before, so it should be exciting. This is United Public Radio Network, FM 105.3 and 107.7 global from beautiful New Orleans, and I'm from beautiful Illinois, I guess you can call it, and Tobe's from the beautiful West Coast. And we have our boss, Joe, tonight. Joe Montalvo is going to do some producing for us and make sure the show goes right. I'm just a beginner, so I need a little, I guess, a little push and shove every once in a while, coming from Facebook and Zoom and those types of shows. And now I'm on the big time and with Joe, and I'm really happy about that too, that I'm able to work with a lot of good people here on this network, and Joe's fun to work with. So is Michelle. So they're great people. But I want to introduce my guest, and we're just going to be about an hour and a half into this, I guess. So we should be able to get a lot done. And Tobe Johnson. He's actually been with me before. We've had some very interesting things that he has come up with about Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and that's what this is all about tonight. Tobe Johnson is an author and the newly released book, The Owl Moon Lab, a paranormal experiment, a biographical account of his research into the Sasquatch phenomenon. Beyond writing, Tobe is the co-producer of a two-part documentary, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and soon to be released 2023, A Flash of Beauty, Paranormal Bigfoot, an in-depth personal narrative documentary that looks deep into the lives of those that have experienced firsthand the strange reality of Sasquatch. He also is a producer and host of A Flash Beauty, a podcast, a weekly show that takes the listener deeper with each guest from each groundbreaking documentary. And I believe Tobe Johnson, Tobe, you're working with Doug Hajicek on this one, our publisher, your publisher and my publisher.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Just so you know, there's an echo every time you speak, Dave. It repeats itself, and my audio is repeating over and over. So there is two audio sources.
Okay.
Here.
Now, am I echoing now? We're trying to straighten out this. Or am I echoing now?
1 second here. Yes, and my voice is as well.
That's strange.
Yeah. So every time I'm speaking, it's a delay, and then my entire sentence repeats as well as yours.
You're coming through clear though on the broadcast from what I see, and I'm also coming through without an echo. Maybe it could be internal. You are coming through clear.
Yeah, I don't think it's on my end because everything was straight before we went on the air, so it would have presented itself that way.
Okay, but I hear you well. Sorry, folks.
I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to leave the studio and come back. That way maybe it'll cancel itself out.
Okay, I'll be waiting. And want to tell you a little bit about Tobe. He's been working with Sasquatch and Bigfoot research for a long time. And he's come up with a lot of great ideas and also research findings, which blew me away last time I talked to him. And he'll be right back after this technical difficulty. I'm sure it's sounding okay out there, but for now, we're going to try to straighten that out. But this Bigfoot thing has been a mysterious thing for me too. I've heard a guy tell me here a while back that Sasquatch and Bigfoot are two different beings, and I don't know. I thought they were the same thing.
All right, it's good. It's all good right now.
Okay, so it's all good. I was just talking to people about Sasquatch and Bigfoot. I've heard there's a couple of guys who told me, and I guess I'm gonna have on soon, that maybe you can dispel this right off the bat after you do your opening. But Sasquatch and Bigfoot are the same thing, right?
Sasquatch and Bigfoot are the same thing, but I guess along the way, there's a commercial success, and then there's the real McCoy and the tribal history. And the commercial success, what I mean by that is the word Bigfoot itself is marketable just based upon the goofy name. Sasquatch, however, is a cultural representation of something that is factual, and it has its own ignored history. And so tonight we'll be talking about the real McCoy Sasquatch.
Okay, the Sasquatch is what this guy was telling me, Tobe, that he is more or less maybe ET related or dimensional related, and Bigfoot is a creature that's from here, or he's evolved, I guess, through the gargantuan apes of the past. I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that opener? We needed to get back to that. What's going on with you and what's new with you?
Well, it sounded like we were in the Grand Canyon, so I'll just if I could yodel right now, I would yodel.
Okay.
But you know, thank you for the kind words, even if they were echoing through my ears here. I'll fall asleep well tonight. As it pertains to why I'm on the show, first of all, thank you for having me on here. It's always great to talk about, you know, one of the biggest hobbies I have is looking into this crazy mess that we call Sasquatch. And you know, I obviously you and I are in some good company with Doug Hychek and our publisher Hanger One Publishing, and we both have books out on passion projects. But when it comes to Bigfoot, it was kind of a, you know, a book that wrote itself, and it was about 12 years in the making. I didn't ever plan on writing a book about Sasquatch, but you know, really, it's a story, a culmination of my origin story, looking into the subject matter. And so we can dive in however you want to.
Oh, yeah, we can. Yeah, I mean, last time, the reason why you're on this larger network, in which I just started a week or so ago, I got a file on people that were very interesting that I interviewed before in the past, and I wanted to bring them forward on this show, and that's why you're here.
Okay.
You come up with some really unique concepts about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and some really spiritual and sometimes, you know, fantastical things that you were talking about, like being invisible and coming in houses and leaving little trinkets. You were telling me those stories, and I thought, wow, this is deeper than what I thought. You know, especially with you having some experiences with that. Let's start off by how you got into this. You got started into Bigfoot, Tobe Johnson.
Well, let's see here. I was always a fan of you know, science fiction from an early age. You know, I remember watching a matinee of Close Encounters of the Third Kind with my dad, and that got a larger conversation going about, you know, these two narratives, that of the real world and that of the fictional world. But the two worlds never seemed as though they were going to present themselves as a factual event that would ever happen to me. I mean, in the story Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you're following the hero of our story, played by Richard Dreyfuss, a character by the name of Rory Neary, who's touched by strange events that add up to a calling. And his words spoken were kind of a mantra, as he was having these visions of what is known as Devil's Tower, where eventually this mothership UFO would land. He's getting some kind of, you know, forethought or psychic thought delivered to him that he needs to go there, but he doesn't know it yet. And he keeps saying to himself, as he's building up this famous scene of mashed potatoes at the dinner table with his, you know, family, who has no idea that, you know, this man is having a nervous breakdown caused by alien life. And he keeps saying this means something. Well, it means nothing to the outer world, but it means something specifically to him, and he damn well knows it. And it's a tremendous performance played by a great actor. If you haven't seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it really is the first good movie about Bigfoot.
Right. And
Now,
I was on Joe's panel the other night with Tom Wood, a great artist, great guy. And I asked him, is there any seed planted when you make a drawing, or just like Spielberg, you're talking about Devil's Tower? Is there something that they know that we don't know? Maybe they kind of elbowed up with military people or secretive people and found out what aliens look like and what alien ships have done. Maybe that was a real story. And I asked Tom that, the artist, and he said that he had dreams as a kid and he saw some of these visions, but they were kind of like visions that he dreamed of. So they come out that way. But Spielberg and these other people, I think, are talking to secretive people, and they're finding out things. You know, elite rich people can find out anything they want, right, Tobe?
Yeah, I think that you said a lot there, and when it comes to what the in place powers that kind of pull the strings here beyond the CIA, these individual companies, these networks, they're implanted in the culture, and in particular, what you watch and what you hear and what you ingest. And of course, they're influential in Hollywood. I mean, if you look at the actual meaning of how Hollywood started and what its esoteric roots are, you get into all sorts of interesting things. And I think that the places like the CIA certainly know those kind of places are important to deliver to the masses information that they want to deliver out. So whatever happened with Spielberg and Close Encounter of the Third Kind, I think it's an important milestone for us to look at and say, okay, now why would that film be important for them to show you if they were involved with it, and what's the message that they're sending out? So it's an interesting story, and I think it is kind of a Bigfoot story. I said that earlier. I know it's a UFO alien story here, but we don't really know what Bigfoot is. And because of that, I kind of put them in the category of these other things like ETs and these little grays.
Brings up the first topic here, Sasquatch reality. What do you think Sasquatch and Bigfoot is, Tobe? You've been doing this for years.
Well, I've come to call them, if we're going to jump right into it, they're of two worlds, and goes back to what the Native Americans told me early on. The Native Americans, the First Nations people, the indigenous people that we refer to as Indians, that especially out here in the Pacific Northwest, they take the subject so serious that they only have certain days or holidays or months where you can speak about the subject matter. They still have reverence enough to it to they put it on the bottom part of their totem pole, which is the most powerful position, along with all the other real beings that exist out here in the Pacific Northwest. And they talk about them living between two worlds, and that these two worlds commingle once in a while, and that you can have these visitations periodically with them, but really they're separate. This is a separate tribe, and that they need to be separate for whatever reason. And so that angle always I thought was fascinating, because it reminded me so much of all these other stories of these other beings that live separately, that seem to be peeking in on our world, and we're peeking in on theirs. Although I think they're peeking in on our world a whole lot more. And so I call them land spirits, that they are of the land and they are flesh and blood, but I think mainly they live as an energetic, and we can talk about what that is, but for the most part, let's just stick with spirit. They're of the spirit world, and that would explain so much of what these witnesses have told me over the years in private about what's happened to them.
Now, you were talking about Native American Indians. Do they consider Bigfoot or Sasquatch a shapeshifter?
Well, I think so. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I don't, every tribe has a different version of how they handle the Bigfoot problem, and they don't all agree on it. But certainly, the idea of shapeshifting is something that you can see within the culture of the First Nations people, and certainly in the world of Sasquatch. There's tribal dances, ceremonies dedicated to what they call the basket woman, or Tonaqua, who is a cannibal, a female Sasquatch that throws children in her basket and runs off into the woods and then eats them. And within certain dances like that, you will see this transformation effect through these masks that they've created, where something else is transpiring between these two worlds again. However, the waters get murky here, because now we're in the world of the skinwalker, and the world of the skinwalker and shapeshifters. Is it the same phenomena? I mean, we're literally jumping into the deeper, bigger, cooler questions. And I guess that's what I would like to propose here, is that I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what the hell are the right questions to ask. I don't even think we know the right questions to ask about this phenomena yet, because we've been so dumbed down by Hollywood with the stupid idea that these things just have big feet. Well, you think God has big feet? Do you think that space has a big bang? I mean, yeah, there was a big bang, but that is the dumbest word to describe what happened as far as creation. We're talking about something far beyond these ridiculous terms. And that's why I like to call them Sasquatch, because there is this beautiful imagery, this mystery that is why I'm involved with this, is because of this, the strange mystery that is Sasquatch. So to answer your question, I have talked to lots of witnesses over these years since about 2008, 2007, and they talk about exactly that they saw a Sasquatch run behind a tree, and out the other end ran out a white wolf. These are the kind of stories that you will hear.
Right. I talked to a Native American out at the Hopi tribe out there in New Mexico, and this elderly lady, when I asked her about shapeshifter, if she ever seen one or a skinwalker, she looked at me and with fear and turned and walked away. And the younger guys that never talked to the elders about that, they're afraid of that because they've all seen skinwalkers or shapeshifters out there, and that's phenomenal. But here you talk about the links between Sasquatch and the witness. Tobe, what do you mean by that? The witness and the Sasquatch, it's what the eye beholds, I guess.
Well, getting back to what you were saying earlier, the First Nations people believe bringing up the name invokes the spirit. Words have power, and so they will. I've seen them talk about that before in public, and privately they go smudge themselves and do a ceremony of protection after they even talk about it. And Sasquatch is sometimes in the same category. I've been told point blank, they didn't say this, but I got the overtones. Hey, you dumb white man, we can't talk about this till such and such time, and then we can bring up, in this case, the term was of a Kalapuya First Nations gal talking about Chichu Chippy, which was the Kalapuya term for Sasquatch. Gal's named Esther Stutzman, who's an oral tradition specialist and talks about the Kalapuya stories. And so, but getting to what you were asking me about witnesses and shapeshifting, is that you have these two categories of witnesses. And so let's start here. The first category is those who are interested in the phenomena and eventually may have a sighting of a roadside 3-second sighting, and that's it. That maybe they're hooked, maybe that's all they get. That's the story. Let's go to the other classification of Bigfoot witnesses and experiencers. These people who I call Sasquatch contactees. These people tell that they tell tremendous stories that they have Sasquatch in their own backyard, that the phenomena is within proximity of their home, and it is on their acreage, and it interacts with them through these puzzling games, almost this give and take, and that they have ongoing interactions and ongoing sightings. But it is so weird and so crazy that they can't seem to predict how it's going to happen. So they can't get any evidence of it. And they do talk about things like shape-shifting. They talk about how they will control animals around to divert attention, or how, like I said, they'll come out the other side of the tree and be another rare looking, obviously Sasquatch being the most rare, but a white wolf running out the other side of the tree, pretty darn rare. So yes, I mean, this is also goes back to these indigenous stories about how these animals aren't just animals, how they communicate with the spirit world.
Right. And another thing, the dimensional aspect of it, I've heard witnesses, as you're saying, they have talked that they jumped out from behind a tree, took 1 or 2 steps, and they were gone, disappeared. So
right.
Are they jumping dimensions, Tobe?
Well, I don't have any proof of anything regarding vibrational states and quantum physics. But you can certainly dig into that world and find that there's some interesting connections between what these Sasquatch contactees or extended experiencers or habituators that deal with this on a personal basis. Their families do. And they will talk about them having these puzzling powers to where they can cloak, how they can walk through heavy brush without making a sound, how you could turn around and have one standing behind you, while you're standing in the middle of a gravel bed where you'll hear the slightest of sounds. Certainly coming inside locked areas without opening doors. These are all things that the average flesh and blood researcher is scared to death to talk about, because it doesn't seem to fit inside this neat box that says missing link, Gigantopithecus blacki, Newtonian science. Here is where we will focus our attention only. And I think that's a mistake on their part. Although, here's how I feel about that. Those that are invested in the flesh and blood, it's probably best for them to be invested in that, because this taking the, to use a Matrix reference, to take the red pill is to never look back at the old world again. You can't undo going down Alice's rabbit hole. Once you're in there, you're forced to look at it. It's just, it will change you for good. And I don't think everybody's supposed to do that. So for the most part, I leave these people totally alone, and they leave me totally alone. And, I think it's probably better that way.
I've had several Bigfoot, researchers on my show. Todd Standing, one of them. You probably know all of these guys. I brought it up about dimensional and ET related sightings with these Bigfoot or Sasquatch. They come on point. I said, no, never say that. And they're with the flesh and blood. They said that they're beings that here on Earth, they live here. They live in caves, tunnels, or whatever. And that's how and then they hide their bones. They're smart enough. They're actually smarter than us, actually. So there has to be some intelligence there. But yeah, just like you're saying, the flesh and blood thing with them being here, and then the dimensional aspect and the ET aspect, I'm confused. And what about your first? Did you ever see one? I have never seen a Bigfoot. Have you ever seen one, Tobe? I think you talked about hearing one or something.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question to answer. But I like the first part of your question here too, is this omission of evidence from these communities that have invested so much time and effort, money. And that's something I never really looked into, is the temptation to keep that revenue stream coming in. It doesn't come in so readily when you start saying these things are ET.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue. Now, that may piss people off, but it's true. I mean, if suddenly, you have some, fundage coming your way to look at X, and all of a sudden you say it's Z, that revenue stream totally changes. And it's not easy being made fun of because you say words like cloaking. It's not easy to sit back and, and research this from a different angle and, fight the narrative that has been accepted for so long and say, no, I was wrong. There's researchers out there that say that it's okay to be wrong, but yet they refuse to admit that they're absolutely wrong about things. And I can say, certainly looking into this in the beginning, I was wrong to think that this was only a flesh and blood manner, and that somehow you had to be high or crazy to think that this was supernatural. If you spend enough time looking into this phenomena, and I mean, we have a witness in a documentary I helped co-produce with Resonance Production out of Portland, Oregon, called Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. And there is a witness, a researcher, author, Joe Bielart, who wrote Oregon Bigfoot Highway. It's a best-selling book out here. And Joe's talks in the documentary about, a famous wildlife biologist or naturalist that says that you got to be in the woods I think he said over 200 or 300 hours in a particular area in order to start to interact with the nature around you. Now, I think that's pretty damn true. I think you got to actually kind of live there for these things, for Sasquatch to start to come in closer to you. And so that's our story that we're about to tell the audience here, is this place where this happened, where these 200 or 300 hours added up to 1,400 hours worth of recorded audio, is a place in a little town called Cottage Grove, Oregon, a place that I ended up calling the Owl Moon Lab. And it was at this place that eventually we all had sightings of one kind or another. We had 15 witnesses at least come in and experience the phenomena from all over the U.S. And so, yeah, I did end up seeing something that I can only imagine was a Sasquatch based upon how it approached, how it left, the size of it, and the attitude. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I guess what we, in the ET and the ufologists, and also with the Bigfoot researchers, there are two different camps. Like you're saying, there's some that believe this and some believe that, and they don't want to cross. They don't want to talk about it. And then some people say, well, none of you guys know the truth, do you? Well, when it comes to ETs and UFOs, I haven't figured everything out myself. And I've been involved in that most of my life. And you, with Sasquatch and Bigfoot, you're saying that you still don't have everything figured out. Now, when you were a young kid or whenever you got interested in this, could you tell us, Tobe, how that started with you as a young kid? Were there things that happened?
Well, I never want this mystery to be figured out. I'm not interested in, I love the fact that there's little breadcrumbs along the way that I can follow and say, oh, that's interesting how that adds up to be something repeatable, or that seems to be factual regarding Sasquatch activity. But as a kid, beyond watching a matinee with my father, let's fast forward from circa 1979 to the year 2008 or 9, probably more like 2007, actually, now that I think about it. And it was a little town of Thurston, Oregon. I'd already gotten married and divorced. I was shared custody with my wife and my son, Jude, and we were in a pretty well-known suburb, kind of a rural suburb area on a mountainside around February. And we were headed up the backside of a trail to these cliffs to have lunch between my son and my ex-wife and share some time in the winter. And he ended up seeing what looked like a human-footed track, a bare-footed, 5-toed human-looking track in the icy mud going into the blackberry brambles. So that was pretty strange to see a barefooted track in February in the icy mud going to the blackberries. So we put a little hiking whistle next to it to give it scale, and snapped a photo. Put the photo away. One day I get a message from my mother that, hey, you remember that Bigfoot photo you took, or whatever that track is? It turns out that a guy that goes to church with us, a guy by the name of Ron Olson, was a pretty big Bigfoot researcher back in the 70s and 80s. And he did a movie up in the Three Sisters Wilderness about it. He wants to see this photo. And so he took a look at the photo, and that's kind of how our adventure begins, is by this Bigfoot researcher checking out this, size 13 or 12-inch footprint going into the blackberry brambles, and my son and I having this new mystery, and this Bigfoot researcher saying, hey, they're real. I don't know what you got here, but certainly they do come into neighborhoods. And that really was, something I wasn't prepared to hear, because all I knew was Patterson-Gimlin way out in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
All I knew was the mysterious encounters footage and, everything I'd seen about them out in the dense areas, like, Jane Fossey or Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall had to get out way out in the bush to study primates. And I thought, well, that's the same for this. No, not according to this Bigfoot researcher. And so when I found out that it's a possibility that that was, a track of something that was coming into the neighborhood, I wanted to meet more of these people that believe that. And so I started to talk to them. Once I started to talk to them, I started to put them together in the same room. And I started something called Bigfoot and Beer, where people could meet in the mountains, have a pint, and tell Bigfoot stories. And then that's when everything started to unfold.
So the more beer, the more stories.
Right.
Yeah.
If you want to hear a good Bigfoot story,
you just drink
fill
some
them
beer.
full of
not I won't say that here. I'm not going to talk about that. But we go way back with Bigfoot. Actually, Teddy Roosevelt, he was a hunter and he was a wilderness guy. He had Thomas Edison and he had Henry Ford with him. This was back in the late 1890s, somewhere in there, the turn of the century. They were out in the woods. They spent about 3 days hunting. They had their rifles and they heard the biggest crashing sound and roar. And they all woke up and they grabbed their rifles and they just stood guard for the rest of the night. They was afraid. And the next day they got out of there because they didn't think it was a bear. They've been in the woods a lot. Teddy Roosevelt was a hunter. He knew about bears. This wasn't a bear. So there's been Bigfoot sightings and stories that go way back in time, I guess you could say. Have you heard
even
those
to
stories?
the Sistine Chapel, the director and I were talking to the cinematographer of this documentary, and below the, I think it is, I don't know if it's the fingerprint painting that was done, the infamous fingerprint of man touching God. And below that image, I believe there is 2 Sasquatches painting plain as day, coming out of an underground space or a cave. So if you go throughout history through paintings and cave art, even down in Northern California, there's a giant pictograph of what is known as the Hairy Man, which is, I think, an 8-foot tall cave painting of a giant hairy looking, imposing Sasquatch. So it's in the same vein though as UFO paintings and Renaissance paintings and imagery in Utah of what look like aliens interacting out of portals. You'll also see these Bigfoot images.
Since you're talking about having those meetings and drinking some beer and talking about things, you talk about 2 categories of witnesses. What were you referring to there, Tobe, about the categories of witnesses?
Well, the sane and the insane. No, well, we touched on it earlier, and this would be
called that a few times.
Yeah, this would be the classification of what I call Sasquatch contactees. These are the people that claim to have repeat visitations and interactions, and then possibly some kind of relationship of one brand or another. And then there's just the plain old witness that says one done crossed the road at 2 a.m. and I got, a blurry picture. So those are the 2 classifications. And yeah, of course they vary between those 2. And I'm, these are stereotypes, of course. The classification of the Sasquatch contactee is so rich with scientific data that no one really has looked at since I've been involved with this, because of the fact that it gets into things that are just so weird and cloaking, disappearing the Harry Potter cloak, the image of Predator. We talked earlier about how Hollywood may know something more than it's saying. The movie Predator with, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is absolutely what people describe seeing Sasquatch do. There's in part 2 of our documentary, Flash of Beauty, the Paranormal Bigfoot, coming out this Memorial Day 2023. We get into some of this footage shot known as the Barb Shoot Cloaker image, shot out here in Mount Rainier. And, it really has people stumped as to what she's filmed. But you see, in this video image, and this is what the witnesses describe, is what looks like a pixelation or a mirage, almost like something out of the Predator. that is blending in with its environment just enough to where you can't see it until it moves, and then you see the outline of what would be the bending of light. And so, what is that? There's programs that I talk a little bit about in my book. There was a program called Project Cameleo, where the government was looking in at how to do covert operations and mess with people's mind through using cloaking tech. Cloaking tech is real, by the way. The government is, very interested in cloaking technology with their aircraft in particular. So if that's what's happening, then we may have a more interesting conversation. But here we go again. This is crossing streams, just like they say in Ghostbusters, between the world of the alien and UFOs and Sasquatch. So there is this crossover. And, without the likes of, these are not all my own thoughts, by the way. I look upon the work of Tom Powell, who was a mentor of mine early on. I look upon the work of Henry Franzoni and Ron Moorhead. These are the forefathers of the weird Bigfoot stories, but they are brilliant minds. And, these are the people that I like to elevate as far as these conversations are concerned and give credit to.
Okay, I'm going to make a real station break here. It's where you're listening to United Public Radio Network, FM 105.3 and 107.7 globally from beautiful New Orleans. And this is Strange Reality with Dave Emmons and my guest, Tobe Johnson, and we're talking about Sasquatch and Bigfoot. And you told me a story once, and we're talking about the hard evidence of Sasquatch, physical and beyond. You told me a story about this Sasquatch would come in the house and leave tokens, and you would have tokens out in the forest, and they would communicate with you by leaving little gifts. Could you tell us those stories, Tobe?
Well, over the years, I've heard a lot of weird stories about how Sasquatch will leave things for people, these Sasquatch contactees, and how there is this interaction between the human and Sasquatch. And these can be small things to big things. Usually it starts off with a hot spot, be it on your property, maybe out in your backyard, or in the forest that you go to, a secluded spot where you go do your Sasquatch stuff. And maybe it's preceded by a wood knock when you get out of your car door, or a whoop, or some kind of sign that they're there. Generally, it's in the daytime when these interactions seem to take place, because generally Sasquatch contactees are not interested in getting evidence. They're really interested in the mystery itself, a lot of them. And a lot of them don't even want to be known, by the way. And so these gifts, or these little tokens, we'll call them, are given to them in these power spots, and they can be left out in the open. But man, oh man, they tell you with absolute conviction that they'll get these strange gifts inside areas that just seem impossible to leave gifts, including inside a locked car. They'll find a toy sitting on top of like their steering wheel balancing. They'll go inside their house and maybe, find a white feather sitting on the kitchen counter. They'll come inside their house another day and they'll see a rock the size of a softball. And I'm referring to a specific person right now that found a softball sized rock sitting in the middle of the Persian rug. I myself have found petrified wood sitting in the middle of my sink in my camper. I've found all sorts of stuff that I can only attribute to something of a spiritual nature. Now, why do I think it's Bigfoot? Well, I don't really know that it is, except for the fact that you find attributes, and these people find attributes, including what I talked about earlier: wood knocks, whoops, eye shine at 8 feet, handprints all over the window, these little stick glyphs left near these gifts where something has spelled something out almost in a runic alphabet and set these twigs by these gifts. And when you see a large, greasy handprint, maybe 2.5 size the diameter, the width of my hand on the bed of a truck, and the back of the pickup truck, the bungee cords have been ripped off the hooks, and the bungee cord is 9 feet away in the gravel yard, and here you have these giant hand, in this case 4 giant fingerprints that are laid across the bed of the truck. It starts adding up to something way beyond a hoax, that's for damn sure. And it seems to be, it starts with the world of Sasquatch in my book, and then it goes to these other places that I'm forced to look at, including the world of the ghost and the world of the alien.
Right. Yeah, I asked that question a lot with a lot of people that I know that research UFOs and Bigfoot. I said, what's the difference between a poltergeist, a ghost, an ET, even an angel, and even a disappearing Bigfoot? And they said, there is no difference. They're dimensional. They all come from the dimensions, or their dimensions. We're in the 3rd dimension, then they come from the 5th, and on up to 11 dimensions, whatever, but more. But they come through. Time and space is not a problem with them. They can be here instantly and come through those barriers and those veils. But you were talking about the cloaking of Bigfoot, and he had to be invisible to come in these people's house to do this stuff. And also in your house, they had to be invisible to do that. Is that why you call them spiritual, Tom?
Well, land spirit, that's towards the end of my book, and it has to do with me getting real specific with the phenomena, and basically just being upfront and saying, okay, what are you? And I got an answer. I'll save that for the people that are interested in it. But it's a heck of a story how I got to the idea that these things are land spirit. But I've had things run up behind me in the middle of the day in Bigfoot areas. In particular, there's an area in the Cascade Mountains, right outside of Eugene, Oregon, home of the University Ducks, maybe an hour outside of Eugene. And there's a Bigfoot hotspot that I spent probably 2 years in, a place I called Oz, a remote hillside off of Highway 126. And on this hillside, two of the neighbors who didn't know one another lived in these double wide trailers, and they're all pointing up to the mountain, separately telling me without coordinating that, yes, we have Bigfoot on those mountains, and go for it. Go look for him up there. You have our permission. And so I got express permission from the landowner, and I had something run up behind me on that mountain, in the middle of the trail. It sounded like an elephant on 2 legs, and it ran so quickly, so heavily, that I was sure that it was a giant human that was probably coming to kill me. That's what it sounded like. And it was a beautiful summer day in the middle of a pretty open trail, and whatever it was not there when I turned around. It sounded like it had stopped only about 12 inches from my backside when I flipped around. Now, that really opened up my eyes, because I absolutely knew that there was somebody coming up that trail to kill me. I mean, it sounded like someone was going to get the jump on me, but the sound was crazy. Now
no scent, nothing else that you could actually pick up on.
Not that time. But this goes to what so many people had told me before, that once you get involved with these people, now we had these 2 houses here, right? These Sasquatch contactees that are telling me these crazy stories about disappearing tracks in the middle of the snow. And they showed me photos of them, walking out of the hillside into the field in the middle of a snowdrift, and nothing. Now, they didn't know I was leaning this direction. I didn't prompt the witness to make this a strange story. These stories just, you have to gain these people's trust, first of all, to tell you this kind of stuff.
Yes.
If they think that you're interested in only one version of what Sasquatch is, they're not going to tell you anything. So for all those people out there just like, well, I never heard these stories before. Well, if you show up and be a jackass, they're not going to sit there and give you the keys to the kingdom. You have to have an open mind for this crazier stuff. And because I did, and maybe it's because I so wanted this mystery never to end, I didn't want it to be, and I'll freely admit that, I did not want this to be a giant gorilla. It seemed way too cool. for it to be something other.
Now,
And
you just told us one of your scary stories. Have you heard, out of these people that you've been talking to and researching, what are some of the scariest stories you've heard told about Sasquatch or Bigfoot?
Well, you know, there's disturbing stories, and then there's scary stories. One of the more disturbing stories has to do with the witness that I was just talking about, one of the homeowners from this mountainside. And she went on record about what happened to her. And her name's Mary. And she was certain, her family was certain that Sasquatch was on that hillside. And so she told us privately that she didn't want her daughters to see what she had seen when she was a little girl. And I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, I'm a witness from, the coast, the Pacific coast in Oregon. And I saw one when I was a little girl. And it was masturbating as it was watching me.
Wow.
And she goes, I do not want, because the little girls were being watched in the woods by something that was very comfortable sitting Indian style, believe that or not, in the ferns, watching the little girls play outside in the second floor of their home. And so that, that's a very disturbing, perverted thing for a human to do. Can you imagine an 8-foot tall, horny Sasquatch, masturbating?
I have heard, though, that Sasquatch does like women. And when you have a woman with you, they're more attracted to the group of researchers than if it's just all men. If a woman is with you, they're attracted to women. Have you heard that? And is there any importance to that? Tony?
Yeah, I know people that I know diehard rabid researchers that collect menstrual cycles evidence from their girlfriends. Wow. To go out and have interaction, more successfully, or they will bring as an attractant, kind of like a chum trail for a shark, and they'll bring I didn't expect to go here, by the way, but this is the Dave Emmons show after all. We're firing on all guns. But yeah, I mean, you bring when you find out this is real, you'll do some crazy stuff in order to have these interactions happen. And that's one of the things that I've heard along the way. I've also had guys come out with me and they'll take a rag and they'll dip it in like aqua velva, or they'll dip it in, some version of perfume, and they'll tie it to the antenna of their car. And as they're driving in the woods, their hope is that scent of a scent of a woman, my Al Pacino impression for the night, will bring in a Sasquatch to camp.
Well, yeah, I like asking the ridiculous questions sometimes and getting you into that. But
yeah, you're really digging.
I really drug you into that one, didn't I? But that's the first I've heard of it, though. And also, when you were on my show once before, it was the first I've heard of invisible Sasquatch coming in the house and leaving trinkets, and you were involved in that. And I just think that you said there's a trauma of these Sasquatch sightings. They're just like this woman you said when she was a little girl. Apparently, they're sexually attracted to human women. So does that say something about them being maybe partially human or coming through the human DNA ranks? Tobe?
Yeah, if I'm going to guess what's happening, I think when they're here and having a physical interaction, they have physical issues. They have hunger, they bleed, they shit in the woods, they do all the things, and I think that they can have a physical yearning. Certainly, they seem to have all the personalities of a human: grumpy, sad, happy, jokesters, all those things. I mean, if you look at the case of Ron Moorhead in the Sierra Nevadas, they were being messed with quite often at their infamous Sierra camp, but it was also very playful and it was very inquisitive. And more often than not, that's exactly what you get, is this inquisitive nature. Now, when Ron brought his daughter Rhonda up to the woods, they had a thing for her. and Rhonda will talk about that. In fact, she talks about it on. Well, I probably can't talk about this yet, but let's just say Ron Moorhead's daughter Rhonda has much more to say about her experiences coming up soon, and so you'll definitely hear that. Women get a lot of experiences when they're in the woods. They're some of the best researchers because they have women's intuition. They don't have man's ego blocking it, and that women's intuition is a psychic connection to the spirit world and to nature, and they are an add bonus if you get a good one. If you get one of these coming in the woods, maybe you're not going to have so much fun, but if you get a good woman to come out in the woods with you, I think you're going to have more action.
Yeah, well, you're telling me something my wife tells me all the time. That she said men are crude and rude, and she says, yeah, you got to listen to me and listen to what I tell you, so you don't be so crude and rude. But I went to get an eye exam today, and they put that stuff in your eyes and dilated. And you're talking about your owl lab here, and I was looking like an owl there for a while because I couldn't see for about 3 hours, I think. It was weird. And I told the doctor, I said, my wife said for me to come and get my eyes examined because I see nothing that she says or does, or so getting back to the woman thing, but no, really, she's a good woman.
Good cover there, Dave. At the end,
it's kind of like Rodney Dangerfield. I get no respect. So yeah, but no. Getting back to the Sasquatch thing. Now that we talked about the trauma, and have you seen any really true evidence? You mentioned this. Have you seen true evidence? I know Dr. Meldrum, he's got, I guess, these Bigfoot castings, and he keeps, record of all those. Have you met with him, and have you seen any of that evidence?
Yeah, I've seen evidence from Dr. Meldrum. I've seen evidence from colleagues of his over the years. I've been a part of collecting a lot of this evidence myself. And some of it's been submitted. In particular, we'll talk about the hair analysis that I was involved with, because I can really only talk about the stuff that I've, the chain of custody that I've submitted. But finding anomalous hair is pretty rare because it's very identifiable, because inside the core of a hair, microscopically, anyone can do this if you have a good enough microscope. I don't even think you need an electron microscope. You can see in the inner core of a hair what's called the medulla, and that is basically the inner root. And inside the shaft of the hair, these medullas will either exist or not exist. And sometimes you'll find one that is shattered or looks like it's got strange characteristics to it. Now, those are the kind of hairs that get really interesting, and you should be able to identify those as being human or animal. But sometimes they fall in a category, not too often, but in our case, at a place we call the Almoon Lab, we found these giant knee impressions, and we thought they looked like knee impressions in the mud, so we filmed them. And as soon as we started filming, we started zooming in and finding these black hairs that poked out of what looked like the patella. It was in the middle of the day. It was 2018. It was above the property where all this interaction was happening. And so we filmed ourselves meticulously removing these hairs, gloved up, and sticking them in envelopes and sending them off to Canada before we cast these prints. And when we got the hair analysis back from a gal named Cindy Dosen, who is the kind of the go-to hair analysis gal for Bigfooters, Sasquatchers, she goes, I want you to know that out of 200 hairs or so that I've looked at, this is like number 6 that I would classify as being a Sasquatch hair. She goes, it's not anything in the data bank. She goes, I stake my reputation behind it. She went through the list of things that it's not. And more importantly, she was able to determine without us telling her that it came from an extremity, which I think is really interesting, because after we showed these knee impressions, which we cast, we showed them to an orthopedic surgeon, we showed them to a sonographer, and everyone agrees that these are giant knee impressions of over 1,400 pounds of pressure, which is way out of category, obviously, for even the most, the most obese person on the planet.
Mhm.
And so, an interesting bit of detail from this mysterious place that I investigated.
What now? If she can classify these hairs as being something not of this earth or nothing that has, it comes close to any other animal or critter, what does that tell us about Gigantopithecus? That there was a huge ape, 15,000, 20,000 years ago, they went extinct. Now, a lot of people say, well, they evolved from them. If they did, wouldn't the hair be identifiable? Tobe?
Well, it might be for the fact, but this doesn't even match primate hair. This is human-like hair, but it doesn't match other. And I should ask Cindy Dosen this question here, whether or not it matches chimpanzees or gorillas or orangutans. I will tell you that, on sight, generally these hairs are black. They're they almost look dyed black, human-like hairs. I mean, not fur. That's one thing a witness will tell you straight up. They didn't see fur on the Sasquatch. They saw hair flowing down, like on a beard or, on her head, growing up on the sides of, your body or chest hair. And so when you see these hairs here, they're black, but under microscopically, they generally are Irish setter red. It's almost as though the black is, just the initial color that you see with the eye. But when you get down into the layers of it, this Irish setter red color, and people do see red Sasquatch, bright
Yes.
orange, red, rusty colored. It's a very
Right?
common.
Kind of like a orangutan.
Yes.
Like one of the witnesses, we talked about witnesses a while ago. I have a cousin, and as far as ETs and all this supernatural stuff, he's about as shallow as a dry creek bed when it comes to that. But one day he was out chasing cattle just north of me here where I live, and for his cousin, and he was chasing cattle. He's by himself. He went into the woods. He saw this tall figure, about 8 feet tall. He said it had long hair all over its arms, dangling down. It was standing up 2 feet, and it was a Sasquatch. He has never seen a show or have never watched any of these types of shows on TV. And he saw this, and he's the kind of witness you can believe. He's such a skeptic, but when he come back, to the farm, he
Right.
was pale white and he was scared to death. He ran back out of those woods when he saw this thing. And he said it leaped twice, and he said it was just gone that fast. And he was talking about the long hairs on its arms, and it was kind of reddish color. And he said it's the damnedest thing he's ever seen. And he was still scared when he was telling me 3 or 4 days later. So, yeah, so you can believe that witness when they come forward and say that. And I told him, I said, well, cousin, you saw something I haven't seen. I haven't seen a Sasquatch. You've seen a Sasquatch. Great. That's great. I believe it. So,
Yeah, these witnesses are so profoundly moved. 95% of them are so profoundly moved that it changes their worldview almost in a religious way. They never forget it. They're kind of rewired in a way after that moment. Everything changes for most of them after that moment. And when you get into encounters of hunters, it's a whole different classification of Bigfoot witnesses. In our documentary Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, which you can stream for free on Tubi or watch on Amazon, we interview a witness, a guy by the name of Mark Parker, who was bow hunting near Albany, Oregon, and got fairly close to a Sasquatch that was hiding behind a tree. And here's a guy, his whole, I think he was even a sponsored bow hunter at one time, a professional bow hunter, really, and certainly knows his wildlife. And he was having a visual experience with something that looked like half man, half monkey hiding behind a tree, and knew for certain it wasn't anything classifiable to all the other bow hunters. And these are the ultimate predators, really, these bow hunters, because they have to get close, they have to be quiet, they have to change everything in order to strike at a distance of probably less than 100 yards away with their bow for sure. And so yeah, it's quite something to talk to these guys and watch them. So I've seen some of these guys tear up when they tell me their encounter, and it's not even those their encounter was scary, like it didn't chase these bow hunters out of the woods. It's the fact that they can't go into the woods the same way anymore. I mean, imagine if you couldn't hop on the radio because you thought a monster was going to jump out of the microphone. And so every time you stepped up to the microphone, that's
Sometimes
the
it
way
does.
you know what I mean? And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a technical glitch, I guess that is what
Yeah.
happens. But,
Yeah.
but these
Earlier
guys,
on, yes.
when they step into the woods, they go back to the fact that they're not the alpha predator anymore, and that they're going to be outsmarted as soon as they hop in their pickup truck.
Let me ask you this question. I see these Sasquatch Bigfoot hunters on TV a lot, and you got this lady doctor, scientist, and two other guys. They go in the woods. They come close to seeing these things in infrared. They can pick them up on infrared camera and they disappear. Now, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, slice Bigfoot, whatever. Do you think they have a sense if you're carrying a weapon? Or if you got cameras, they can just smell those electronics, so they know all about that stuff. They're that intelligent, I think. If you go in the woods with cameras, like trail cameras, they know they're there, right, Tobe?
Well, I think they know your intent.
Yeah.
They're so good at reading the human condition that you can't outsmart them. You can maybe trick them once in a while, but I even have trouble with that one. I think they do screw up, but generally they seem to know people's intent so well that you can't outmaneuver them, and you certainly can't outmuscle them. I don't even think you can out tech them. They seem to know exactly where these game cams are in a way that is different than from a deer. I hear the argument, well, Sasquatch can see, the IR beam, and they can smell the plastic, and bears can, find the plastic out in the woods and chew on it. And reindeer see these IR beams as well as deers. That's not what Sasquatch is doing, man. They're finding these game cameras. They're unbuckling the harness of them. Some cases, they're taking the SD cards out and setting them besides the game cam. They are hiding the game cams. They're never real. They're never stealing them. They're never destroying them. And that's something totally different than just regular primate behavior.
And it's not a human, because a human would probably steal them. So
well,
they steal them, yeah.
I mean, I leave recorders out in the woods all the time, right? Like I think that's the one thing that they allow is to put an audio device in the woods. For whatever reason, they seem to interact more with a voice recorder, and it's never stolen or taken. Now, it may be messed with. You may hear foot approach coming up there, and then you'll hear something pick it up or flick the mic head, and you'll find the recorder maybe slightly moved. But very rarely are any of these devices destroyed.
Right. So we were talking about Joe Montalvo is kind of watching over us tonight. He's the boss of the network. Well, him and Michelle are the boss, and he has sound recordings. I think, Tobe, did we want to play those, or can we play them, Joe, if you're there?
Yeah, if they are available, we can go through them and see which ones are available. I don't know if we want to. I think he was saying that clip number 2 and clip number 5 were available, and if that's the case, then we can play those. If not, not quite sure how you want to do it. I will tell you though that we have, there's over 1,400 hours worth of audio that were recorded between a parabolic dish aimed at the woods for over a year and a half and another recorder set in the front yard. And so some of these clips that we have here.
There's Joe. He's going to turn it on for us.
Let's see what.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, so I don't know what audio he's bringing up here, but we could play it, and then I can explain why I'm sharing it with you. Let's see what we got. I see it, but I don't hear it on my end.
I don't hear it either. Yeah.
Yeah. Not coming through, and I see the volumes up. So whatever you want to do, Dave, you want to just talk about them?
Yeah, let's just talk about them. I think we're having a sound issue
Okay.
with these videos. And thanks a lot, Joe. We'll just talk about them,
Okay.
and thank you very much, boss. Okay, Tobe, just tell us about these sounds.
Right. So plug here. This is a copy of my book, The Al Moon Lab. And within the book, there are helpful QR codes. And so as you read along, you get to experience everything I recorded and got as far as evidence was concerned. And there's a lot of audio in here. And these audio captures are put on something called spectrograms. So as you scan this QR code in the book, it correlates to the chapter you're reading, and then you get to see the visualization on the spectrogram. And I talk a little bit about that in the book of why that's important, because it is important to actually look at the sound as well as hear it. Now,
you told me a story, Tobe, last time that you talked about this thing grunting and coming towards the fence. Was that you? That was your story that you was telling me, that it was
right.
grunting and coming towards, and it was making a lot of heavy footsteps, and it was really grunting, real low bellical sounds.
Oh, what are we playing here?
Well, let's see, guys. Can y'all hear this? Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, well let's talk about that audio, because that's not Bigfoot. These Sasquatch contactees that have prolonged experiences, like this family that I was living with at the Al Moon Lab, a couple asked me, invited me to live on their property, Daryl and Cindy Adams. And they started to wonder whether or not they had poltergeist on their property. Now, this is what you'll hear from Sasquatch contactees, is that the Skinwalker Ranch type stuff happens at these homes, and you'll have what appear to be poltergeist activity. Included in that are strange voices. So the recordings that you heard was a compilation of these strange ghost voices that turned up on our recorder, not only in the house, but there was this hot spot between where I lived in my camper and the main house, this metal shop. And in this and around this metal shop is where a lot of these experiences seem to happen. Now, was it because it was between these two, homes, and there was these two different schedules happening between me and the property owners? I don't know. But all I can tell you is that as soon as we put those knee impressions in that shop, it was like a welcoming committee, and all the stuff started to unfold, including a lot of poltergeist stuff. And so that was a compilation of what people would call an EVP compilation of these strange voices. So if people read my book, they'll get a load of a lot of ghost stuff that doesn't seem to fit into the Bigfoot world. I argue that point and say, yes, it absolutely does belong in the world of Sasquatch. And you just haven't heard the rest of the story. I try to tell the rest of the story, and that's the way I do it.
I know you've heard of this. I've heard of some researchers that were on TV talking about Bigfoot mimicking their voices.
Oh, yeah.
Talking back to them. So that tells me there's a high intelligence there, and they're just not mockingbirds. They're very intelligent beings, and they could be something else other than what we think they are, dimensional, ET, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We'll throw it all in one big bag there. But also, let's talk about this low grumbling sound, the ultra sound that they give, that low pitch.
Oh, yeah, infrasound.
Infrasound, in which it dumbs people down. They actually freeze and they can't move. Have you heard stories like that, Tobe?
I've been in the company of people that have experienced it. And it was near this home. It was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before I investigated this home. It was around 11:30 at night. I was up in the woods in a hot spot area where we found some tracks It was about a 5-day investigation on this trackway known as the London Trackway. And on a crazy Sunday night, up in the mountains above this trackway, in a rainstorm, with some first responders that were new to the phenomena, some people that worked on emergency services, 2 of them lost their mind in the woods to a degree that they said, I cannot go any further up this trail. They want me to leave. I'm going to puke. I'm going to cry. And this was all at the behest of them seeing something or feeling something that none of us in the group could feel or see. And they were so unnerved by the fact that they were basically, being messed with this way, that they didn't know what to call it. And of course, I had heard by then, there's something called infrasound that, other animals can possibly do, including lions and killer whales,
Yes.
and, I believe elephants as well. But this was telling them something psychically. We want you to leave. You shouldn't have brought a gun. In one case, the guy reached out and grabbed his gun and prepared to throw it at it's 12 o'clock at night in the rainstorm, and throw his gun in the middle of the brush. These are rednecks, by the way. This guy was, and
Yeah,
certainly for him to throw his pistol, is a crazy thing.
Yeah, that's big time. Yeah, that infrasound gets around also to ETs and how they dumb you down, but you don't really hear it. It's a frequency, a vibration that they dumb you down with. But getting to now, let's talk about this guy that wrote this book, 411 Missing People. Have you heard of missing people in your area around Mount Rainier and those places around Washington State? I know Alaska has a lot of missing people. And do you think Bigfoot or Sasquatch is responsible for some of those missing people, Tobe?
Well, the Native Americans certainly do. They talked about, I believe it was Sarah Winnemucca. There's a couple others. Albert Osman up in Canada near, I believe it's called Toba Island Inlet or something like that. These are 2 well-known cases of people that have been taken away. They describe very interesting details. Sarah Winnemucca's case, I believe she was returned, and she actually brought back physical evidence. She brought back a Sasquatch hair or hairs that were entwined on a Native American. I believe she was a Paiute Native American. I think the hair was woven into one of their tribal dresses, which is on display somewhere. Albert Osman's case, he was taken away to some cave and had to escape by supposedly tricking one of the Sasquatch and running for his life. But he was describing Sasquatch language, which nobody was talking about, back then. And this is like at the, I believe it was the 1920s or something like that. And what he was describing was being taken to some cave, I believe, where there was a family of Sasquatch, and hearing utterances which sound a lot like what Ron Moore had described and what we captured in our book, which is this samurai. This is what they call it, right? The samurai chatter, which is, it sounds like it's very Asiatic. It's very fast language, very deep. And it's hard to classify as being human at all when you hear it. But this is something that, a lot of people ignore for the fact that it's like, oh, Sasquatch doesn't kidnap people. They would never do that. They're just, a wild creature that is very docile. And that doesn't seem to be the case. I think you could catch one on a bad day.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe the Sasquatch is taking people? They are taking them to another dimension, maybe, and transporting them to another. We got human-like worlds.
Let me tell you, Dave. Yeah. At the property, we got so much audio, and one of the creepier, crazier, more fascinating sounds that we got that I could not ignore, and I actually heard with my own ear one night when I was staying. I was camped out in the backyard listening, and it was the sound of a rock being pushed. It sounded like, a 2,000-pound granite boulder being slid. And it was kind of a rolling sound mixed with a rock sound. And we could never figure out what that is. Now, in the world of the paranormal investigator, there is the phenomena of what they call the bowling ball sound. It's a very similar description of what these paranormal researchers describe of this rolling sound. And so what is happening here is, is this a physical action happening to where something's pushing a boulder and the Sasquatch live underground? I don't think so. I think and we need to harken back to these other researchers who are saying, now, wait a second, we get these EVPs of this weird sound as well from the spirit world interaction stuff. Is it possible that you're hearing, time and space being messed with in a certain way? These energetic sounds. I think so. And can you be taken into this world when the sound occurs? Is that them coming into this world? More often than not, and I talk about this in the book, is that we would hear this popping sound or smacking sound, and this pop was like it sounded like the air expanding all at once, and then we would have activity. You would hear the strange pop sound, and then you would hear something walking. You would hear something breathing, sniffing the air, percussively having some kind of interaction of one branch or another. And I think that this popping sound is like a psychic supernatural energy displacing in our world for theirs, and that is the moment that you're having these interaction. Included is this what are called apports, where things appear in thin air, like ghost hunters will talk about coins, pennies from heaven falling down, or shiny objects, marbles, things like that falling from the sky or flashing through the wall. You'll see it in the movie Poltergeist. That kind of stuff happens in this Bigfoot world too, and not too many people are talking about it.
That's why you call it spiritual. Now, you told me a story about your cell phone. I know it sounds simple. We're going to try to drag it out of you again, but it's a little piece of something that I remember from the stories you told me. You had a missing cell phone and you were on a boat. Could you tell us that story, Tobe?
Right. Well, in the at the Al Moon Lab, we got used to getting very unusual and pointed gifts of significance. And these were things that were placed in odd places at odd times of day, at all times of the day. And they sometimes had to do with things that you were just talking about or discussing. And in this case, this had happened several times by this point. And I had my trailer parked next to this metal shop, and I had this, I think it was like a 12-foot long fishing aluminum boat. And I was a truck driver at that time, and I'd mentioned to the property owner, I'm running a little bit late. I'm coming down I-5. What's happening at the house? What's the Bigfoot news today? And I got to stop by T-Mobile because my cell phone's on the fritz, or I need an upgrade. And so I get home, and a couple days pass, I believe, like 2 or 3 days, and we're out BSing by my probably looking at some weird gift. And as I'm coming along the side of the boat there, underneath the oar of my boat is a muddy cell phone. And it is like when you these gifts of significance, which is this absolutely was, right? They have an earthen patina on them, usually moss or mud, as though they have been exhumed and secured in some place. Sometimes these gifts even smell like a wet cave. They smell like the earth. And this had that same patina. In fact, I think I even have this phone. I have it somewhere on my desk here with me. And to me, that was a total, I mean, what kind of coincidence is that? What's a cell phone doing inside this boat? And
Right.
so that was preceded by a moment where I had put up Christmas lights around my trailer. Just little, summer, but I wanted to decorate and maybe see a little better at night because I was hearing strange footprints and finding stuff around my trailer at all hours of the day, and they were coming up to the window. And I come out to the boat, and Daryl finds under the oar of my boat the same place the cell phone was, a in perfect condition, an antique Christmas ball. It was like a glass Christmas ball with a little tiny holly leaf embezzled on the top of it. It didn't have the hook on it, but it had the little sprig on top. It was placed gently in this metal boat underneath the oar of my boat. Now, it's hard for me to ignore these gifts of significance based upon interactions of things that I'm talking about and doing around the property. Here I hung a Christmas lights. I'm getting this Christmas ball. I'm talking about my phone. These stories add up over time, especially in this story. But they've been discounted so long by these apers as just being like, well, we're not going to mention this report. We're here to look at Bigfoot prints and talk about how big it was. Yeah, I get it. Like, that's cool. That's a good adrenaline rush, but you're not going to get closer to it.
You got to go by your gut feeling too.
Mm-hmm.
You have a gut feeling that you think this is a Sasquatch doing these little tricks.
Well, this is where the handprints were. These are where the size 14.5-inch tracks are found. You know what I mean? The hair. Right. So, yeah.
And you've heard the breathing and the grunting. Now, why do these Sasquatch researchers want to hide a lot of this information? What do you think, Tobe? I mean, why do they want to hide it? Is the government involved in military know about Bigfoot?
In our documentary, A Flash of Beauty, we talked to a plumber out of Coos Bay, Oregon, and we recently interviewed him for our podcast called A Flash of Beauty, the podcast. Real interesting fella, and he collects stories as a plumber and an artist around the little town of Coos Bay. And he talked to one of the forest rangers and asked, why do they keep this a secret? And the forest ranger says, we have to keep it a mystery, because if this ever gets out that this phenomena exists, then, kiss these forests goodbye. Imagine trying to protect something. One of the conspiracies is in Oregon, they shut down all the lumber mills because of the spotted owl in Oregon, especially. Right. And a lot of these towns suffered because of it. And the spotted owl was basically a test subject to see what would happen if they ever came out with the Sasquatch evidence, and to see how these towns would suffer that way. And so that was, this forest ranger's excuse. I think it's beyond that, because if they know these things are real, they know all the stuff that I'm talking about is also real. Right. Now, maybe they don't know all the specifics. They aren't read in like, the upper echelons of these Men in Black type organizations. But when you get into what's going on with disclosure and the world of the UFO right now, in fact, we're just getting ready to have another briefing on this. There's a lot of crossover.
Right. I was talking to a couple of explorers, and they're a little bit older guys, but they run all over the place. So they were up in Alaska. You might know this town up in Alaska on the shore there. It's destitute now. I mean, they left it because there were some killings there, and they said Sasquatch did it. Well, these guys went up and they researched this area. And the big story I take away from them, that there was 3 of them in the cabin. They heard some sounds outside. So one of the guys, that's the 2 of the researchers, he walks outside of the cabin, and he hears this rustling in the trees. And he saw this fairly good sized tree shaking and shimmering like there's something climbing down it and causing it to shake. And he's wondering what's going on. And he starts backing up to the cabin wall in the back, and he had a shotgun up, but he said he couldn't see it. It was actually invisible. And then he said it come at him. It just he could feel the footsteps coming at him. It was invisible. And I asked him, why didn't you shoot? He said, because I couldn't see it. And he said when it hit him, it was like a big blast of wind hit him when it hit him. And he said it just disappeared. And I'm thinking, wow, what a story. And these guys, I mean, they've been around and they've been researchers. And that was one of the big stories they told me that night when I interviewed them. But they're going to probably be back and talk to me sometime soon. They're always out researching. But those are fantastic stories, just like the stories you told me about the spiritual aspect of Bigfoot, Tobe. That amazed me. And I think that's pretty neat to hear.
Well, thanks. I don't know if any of it's true. It's my one man's opinion, but I think I'm leaning on something that's the real McCoy, and it's led to a good time. I've never been bored doing it, never been hurt, not even spiritually. And I've leaned up against this phenomena pretty hard. I've seen people hurt by this phenomena because they get so obsessed with it and their ego gets so involved with it. Usually it's that kind of thing that will take down a person. But yeah, you just got to find that balance and don't let it take over.
Right. It's the same thing with ETs, and they've never hurt me. They've scared me. I mean, I've seen 6 of them up close, UFO craft, but they kind of like energize you with spiritual energy, and it's nothing harmful. Some people talk about having bad, just like with Bigfoot, they've had bad experiences. They've been chased in the woods and that type of thing. You see that these mysteries are Lost in the Woods or something like that. It's on TV a lot. And I think our buddy Doug Hydjak, he gets involved in Monster Quest and those types of things. He's done a lot of the shows. But it's interesting to find out the different aspects of this Bigfoot and Sasquatch phenomenon. And you brought up something completely different than other people have, and that impressed me. And that's why I wanted to talk to you again and let you tell the people about the spiritual and the invisibility of these creatures. Is there anything else you want to say about these creatures before we start closing down shop?
Well, if you want to have an interaction with them, if you want to find out whether or not I'm full of it, you can do that by finding a place name on a map. And what I mean by that is go on Google Images and start looking not over national parks, but remote areas. Try to find older paper maps too, and look for the stranger names that have words in it like Spirit Lake or, Devil's Ridge. If you can find things like Baboon Creek, even better. There's a Baboon Creek in Oregon. How do you think they got these names? Like these strange names? Skookum Creek, these are places that you should go camping with 1 or 2 people. Sit back, have an open mind, stay for like 3 or 4 days. Don't bring a lot of tech. Keep the fire low so you can hear at night. Plan to be skunked the first night and see what happens. Start going to these conferences and listening to these conversations that are off the stage in the Outer Banks and hearing these stranger stories, especially after they have a couple beers.
Yeah.
And that's when you'll start hearing the real McCoy.
Yeah, I like that group that you're talking about. I'd like to get involved in that group. But I want to read off some things here just before we close. The upcoming documentary, A Flash of Beauty, a Paranormal Bigfoot. Everybody should be watching for that. The conference in Forks, Washington, Memorial Day weekend. That's May 26th. And the 2nd annual Forks Sasquatch Days Festival. Guest and a first ever debate live between 2 investigators and witnesses who differ on the supernatural connection and the flesh and blood connection. That should be interesting. Does it get heated sometimes?
Oh yeah, we're not looking to get in a big brawl or fight. This will be an elevated discussion.
Yeah.
But these are 2 strong, opinionated men that are certain that the other one is wrong, and so it should be a lot of fun.
Okay, we're going to close the show, and you've been listening to United Public Radio Network, FM 105.3 and 107.7 globally from beautiful New Orleans. Of course, it's West Coast and Illinois right here, the 2 of us. And you've been listening to Strange Reality with Dave Emmons, and our producer tonight is Joe Montaldo, the boss, and so is Michelle DeRocher. She's also the boss. And which they tremendous people. I enjoy being on this network. And Tobe, I just had to bring you on this network. And Tobe Johnson, you were fantastic tonight. I love the stories about the invisibility, the supernatural, and the spiritual aspect of these creatures. Thank you so much, Tobe Johnson, and everybody. Have a good day, and hope you listen to this program and start absorbing some of the differences in which we have going on with a lot of researchers. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Tobe Johnson. Thank you.